towns, in the villages in Angola, you'll find people speaking Portuguese. You will see that some of us, through their system in so-called assimilado process, did go to Portuguese schools. Some of us who could fortunately do that. But that did not prevent us from doing one thing, to want to be Angolan rather than Portuguese, or rather than something else. And that's why there was a resistance, so that we would be on equal terms and be able to dialogue as equals. And that was the whole reason, the raison d'être for the resistance that characterized Angola throughout the 5 centuries of Portuguese rule. Our culture, we have our own languages. We have at least the main languages, Angolan languages. There are at least 5 key important Angolan languages. We understand each other. But then we use Portuguese as the language for the day-to-day, for the state, and the language to communicate with the rest of the world, because with our local languages, we could only communicate across the borders, with the Congo, on the east with Zambia, and in the south with Namibia. We have common languages right there, and common people. The Kikongo on the north, on the east, the Bembas, the Nyanyekas on the same, on that side. On the eastern part, on the southern eastern part of Congo, the Chokwe, very important African culture. You will see representations of that culture in many places where you look for African art. The culture of the Chokwe, very important. Of the Kikongo, very important, represented in the African culture. So we have had this. So it's not difficult to understand why the dialogue was difficult, but then it became possible, especially at the end of Portuguese colonial rule in 1975. Nowadays, we are in good terms with the Portuguese again. There are many of them living in Angola and enjoying living in Angola.
When I look at the map of Angola, because as I confessed, I did not know where it was. I always thought it was in Latin America. But when I looked at the map of Angola, I found that it's not one country, but 2 countries. There's something called Cabinda, which is a sort of Alaska of Angola. It's a separate province altogether. And apparently, like Alaska, it is said to be very rich.
Yes.
In fact, probably richer than the rest of Angola. Can you tell us a bit about this Cabinda, which is either Alaska for Angola or Kuwait for the future world?
Very well, yes. Cabinda, Angola, again, as I said, it's 1.28 million. That includes Cabinda. Cabinda is effectively an enclave, separated from part of the Congolese territory, Congo, DRC, and the sea. And it is part of Angola. If you look at the northern part of Angola, is the same ethnic family. In Cabinda, you will find it in our northern provinces of Uíge and Zaire, This was all part of the same. When the partition of the continent was being done, this is why you will find in some parts of Africa borders which are done with square and rules. It was done on a map, a conference, and Angola. This is not because of Cabinda.
No, these are the Portuguese trying to
Portuguese.
come in.
So, you know, Cabinda was kept part of Angola, and there is a very important decision of the African Union, incidentally, and I'm glad that Tete is here, which dictates that the borders which were inherited from the colonial time are the official borders of each of the countries.
Yes, but how did...
So that includes Cabinda.
How did Angola and Cabinda get separated by the Congo?
Well, how did Alaska get separated from the rest of the states?
That's because they bought it for $25 or something like that.
Well, we didn't buy it. We didn't buy Cabinda. It just became part, it was part of the entire territory. Actually, if we looked at differently, the southern provinces of Congo should also be part, they were part of the Kingdom of Congo. Capital was in Angola. So if you want, we could also claim it, but we don't claim it. But incidentally, Cabinda, yes, it is effectively is relatively rich because of oil, and this is the part where oil started being more intensively developed by, again, an American company, the Cabinda Gulf. Used to be Gulf Oil, now it's Chevron. And this is, I would say, nowadays, Cabinda, the oil exploration in Angola, in the province of Cabinda, accounts for about 70% of the total oil exploited in Angola right now. But new blocks which are being developed further south, contain quite a bit of oil also.
Yeah, but the minute you begin talking about oil in Africa, the mind immediately turns towards China, because China is a major player in African oil. And so I want to know, you say that it is Chevron and Gulf Oil, but I want to know, is there any role of China in Cabinda?
There is.
And if so, how big is that role?
Yeah, okay. The Chinese oil companies are they've just recently arrived in Angola. I would say they have come 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, not before. They started coming into Angola first just to buy oil, not to exploit oil. The oil companies of China, Sinopec and all the rest, they have come into Angola very, very recently. And yes, they are there. They are not in Cabinda, incidentally. They started basically they are present in the more recently developed fields, which is further south. This is where they are. And again, not as majors. In Angola, the major oil companies are basically from the United States, from the UK, talking about BP, and Esso and Exxon. You're talking about in the French, the Total, the Italians, Agip, and the Nordic, Norway. These are basically the companies exploiting oil in Angola. The Chinese are very recent, again, as I said, and they are in more, they do not account for a larger part of the exploration part. They are basically they are importing oil from Angola. And talking about importing oil, to Angola, the bulk still comes